Okay, it's now time to build the validation functionality, and to make this a little bit more relevant to what we're actually doing, we're going to be building the register page at the same time. Now, this isn't actually going to register a user, but what it's going to do is we're going to include the form, and we're actually going to validate each of these form fields, and then if we pass the validation, we'll just we'll leave this block empty so we can come back to it at a later time. The main point here is to build a validation class that we can use on any of our pages, so for when the user's changing the password, updating their profile information, and even logging in, so the fields on the login page. But the registration form provides us the ability to include required fields. It provides us the ability to include fields that shouldn't or should match, so the password and the secondary entry of the password, just to make sure the user hasn't made a mistake. And also it gives us the ability to check a unique value as well. And we'll be baking this into our validation class, so it all works really well, and just it just makes development a lot better. So this validation class again can be used outside of this login and register application. So by building it, you're building up a toolkit worth of code that you can just reuse again. So the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and build the register form. So on the register.php page that we've got open here, let's go ahead and start building up our form. So this isn't anything too complicated. We'll just include the basic functionality that we need. So let's go ahead and open and close our form. So the action is going to be left empty. That will just submit back to this page. And we'll then go ahead and set the method to post. So what do we need? Well, we're going to encase each of the fields in a div wrapper. I'm going to give this a class of field. Now, you don't really need to do this. This is just a better way to break up your form fields, because we might need to apply styling to each of these at some point. But let's go ahead and create some labels. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a label for the username, and we'll go ahead and create the input field as well. So input for username and label username. So now we need to create the actual input itself. So this is going to be a type of text. The name of this is going to be username, so the name that we pick up in PHP when we read it. We also need an ID. The reason being is that we've said label for username, so we need an ID just in here. The value is going to actually be the previous value that was supplied by the user, but for this we're going to need to use our input class, which we're going to look at a bit later on. So we'll go ahead and we'll complete this functionality a bit later. I'm also going to set autocomplete off so we don't get suggestions brought up for us. So that's the one of the fields. Let's go ahead and create some more. So this is going to be the password. So that is going to be the label. And we obviously need our input here, type of password. Okay, so the name here is going to be password again, and then obviously the ID is going to be password, so we can make use of the label functionality. And by the way, if we were to open this in our browser, this basically allows us to click on password, click on these labels, and that will automatically allow us to have that field sort of highlighted, ready for input. So the password again is going to be exactly the same as this. It will just be very slightly different. It will be password again. Oops, sorry, I've classic field. This will be password again. Choose a password. We'll just say repeat or enter your password again, and the type will be password, name will be password again, and ID will be password again as well. And we'll also have the ability to enter the user's name. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just copy and paste these to save a little bit of time, because this is very repetitive. So input for name, type equals text, name equals name, and ID equals name as well. So the last thing we want to do is go ahead and create a submit button and the value of register. Perfect. So that's going to submit our form. At the moment, it doesn't do anything because we don't have any PHP code at the top of the page to actually do anything. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, first of all, at the top of our page, checking whether the input actually exists or not, and then we're going to create the validation class as well. So as part of this, it's important that we actually build our input class, which is very, very straightforward. So we're going to be building our input class as well, because what we're going to be doing is passing input to this validator, checking it. And also we're going to be basically outputting the old values, like I said here as well. So for example, we could do the same for this. So value equals this. So if some validation errors did occur, we want to give the user their data back so they don't have to constantly be typing the data in the form. So let's go ahead and quickly focus on the input class. This is fairly straightforward. The first thing we want to do is a method that checks if any data actually exists, so if input has been provided or not. And the second method is again going to be a static method, and that's just basically going to retrieve an item. So let's go ahead and define this. This will be class input. And we don't need any properties, but the first function we need, or method that we need, is a static method, and that's exists. Now we need to define the type of data that we want. So this will either be get or post. And I'm going to say type, but I'm going to set this a default to post. So if we don't define get specifically, it will check if post data has been provided or not. We're then going to go ahead and switch on the type. So we're going to switch on type, and we're going to check a few cases. So the cases are obviously going to be post and get, and we'll also have a default here as well. And that will be to return false, because we want to assume that we should always get data. So in here we're going to perform a ternary operator, and we're just going to say if not empty $_post echo true, return true, otherwise return false. And we do exactly the same thing for here as well, and that will just be using get. Now this might look a little bit confusing, on first glance, but let's just take a look at how we might use this on our page. Obviously, to make use of our class that we've just built, we're going to need to require in our core init file, and that's because we have our autoloader, everything in there. Quick if statement, input exists. We already know that we are automatically resolving to post data, so we don't really need to define post in here like that. We can just leave that empty. I'm just going to say echo submitted. So what this is now going to do is allow us to detect if this form has been submitted. Oops, little syntax error there. Let's go ahead. There we are, missing the semicolon. So now what's going to happen is when we click register, we get this submitted message. So we've created a really quick and easy way to check if data's been submitted here or not. It doesn't matter what data has been submitted, because at the end of the day, we're going to be doing that in our validation class, which is the whole point of doing this. So we're going to be working with the validation class in just a moment after we've defined another method here. So this is going to be again a static method. This is going to be get, and we're going to define in here which item we want to get. So this is going to be the same as saying echo $_post username. So it will be exactly the same as doing that, but in this case we'll be saying input get username. So that's how we want this to work. So a couple of if statements, or one if statement with an else. We're going to say if is set $_post item. So we're checking for post data first. If that's available, we're going to return that item. Otherwise, if is set $_get item, then we want to do exactly the same as we did here, but that will be for get data. Now, by default, we want to return an empty string, and that's really important because if this data doesn't exist, we still want to return something back. If we don't return something back, then this, we're going to have problems here. We want to always assume that this data is available, but if not, we just return an empty string. It's as simple as that. So that's why this is not going to error or return anything wrong when we just simply refresh the page like this. Oh, it has. Okay, let's check. There's just a syntax error here. So, there we go. My mistake. So, providing that you've actually remembered to declare that it's a method, when we click register now, nothing happens, and that's because this username isn't available. If I was to type Alex in here and click register though, we should get this returned. Oh, sorry, we're not actually echoing anything out, are we? So let's just echo this out, obviously. So if I type in or press register, nothing happens. Alex, register, Alex appears. So we now have the ability to grab data that we need from either the post or get global array. So that's not what we want to do. We want to actually validate data. So we've done our input class. Let's get rid of that. Validation class now is important. So what we actually, let's take a look at how we actually might want to use this. So let's go ahead and say validate equals new validate. So we want to create a new instance of this by instantiating the class. We've got a new object now. We can actually perform validation. So I'm going to say validation equals validate check, and I want to check a particular set of data against certain conditions. And in this case, I want to check post. So I then want to create an array. Now this array is going to contain all the rules that we're going to include in our validation. So it will basically be the field name of the data that we've included in our form, and it will then be things like whether this is required, the minimum value it can be, the maximum value it can be, whether it's unique or not, etc, etc, etc. So in this case, we have 4 fields that we need to validate, and these will all be arrays as well because we're going to define within the array the rules. So let's just create all of these first before we do anything else. So it'll be password, password again, and the full name of the user. So for the username, let's define what rules we might want to pass through. Remember, we've not actually written any of this validation code yet. We're just writing how we want to be able to use this, so then we can then retrospectively go back, build this object, and allow this to actually function as we want. So we want this to be required. So we say required true. We want a minimum value for the username of 2 characters. We want a maximum value. Remember, in our database, we set this to 20. So we're going to say we want it to be a maximum of 20 characters. And we want this to be, we want this to be unique. Now, what do we mean by unique? Well, to avoid us having to create an additional query somewhere inside of this code, we might just want to say, well, we want this to be unique to the user's table. Okay, so that's all we want to do. We just want it to be unique to the user's table. We don't want to have to perform additional queries. So by doing this, we expect that the value of username here to be looked up and automatically check if it exists or not in that table. And that will be determined by the name we give it here. So this name must match the field name. So this name must match the field name in the database. That could, of course, be changed if you needed a bit more flexibility or to make this look a bit different. Perhaps you don't want to reveal the field names in your database. That's absolutely fine. For now, we'll be doing it this way, but it's just as easily changed. So let's go ahead and fill in the rules for the other fields. So we want this to be required true. We obviously want all of these values to be required. Now, this is a minimum of 6, say. There's not a lot of security going on here as such. We're just saying we want it to be at least 6 characters, just so it's a little bit more secure than it might be if they were to type A as a password. You could, of course, include additional functionality, say a strength meter or something like that, and that could be baked into this validation class as well. Now password again, this is obviously required, but this is slightly different because we want this to match password. So we could just say, well, matches password. So we want this password again to match the password field, so we can define that as well. And again, we've not written any of this functionality, but this is ideally how we would want it to function. So name is going to be required, and we want a minimum of 2. We also want a maximum of, I think it was 50 we defined in our database. Yes, so we want the name to be a maximum of 50. So that is it. That's what we want to actually happen with inside of our validation class. That's how we want things to work. Now, how do we want to actually detect if this has passed or not? Well, a little if statement would be nice to say if validation passed, register user. Otherwise, we won't want to output errors. Okay, so this is what we want to happen. We want to check if the validation has passed or not, which means all of these conditions that we've defined have been met. Now, this might seem like the validation class is going to be very, very, very complicated. In actual fact, it's not going to be that complicated. So let's go ahead and just start building this now. So the class is going to be called validate, as we've already seen. In terms of properties, we want to detect whether it's been passed or not. We want to check if there have been any errors and store these errors so we can output them. And we also need the ability to create an instance of our database. So we'll be doing that within the construct function. So when we construct the validator, we set this instance of our database. And obviously that's only going to be, because we're using the singleton pattern for our database class, if the connection has already been made to the database. Otherwise, it will just return the instance of it. So we need 3 private properties. Passed, and that's going to be false by default because we want to assume that it's not passed. We have errors equals, and that's going to be an array. And we have db equals null. It's just going to be nothing. So in terms of our constructor, we have a public function construct. This will be called when the database, the validate class is instantiated, and we just want to set db to db get instance. And we have one main complicated method, and that's the check method, which we've already seen here. So let's go ahead and just define that. So public function check. Now, what do we want to pass in here? Well, we want to pass in the data that we want to loop through and check, and an array of rules. So we want to say source and items, and that's going to be an array. And we'll set that by default an array, just so we don't get any errors inside of our for each loop, which we're going to build now. So the main idea here is to list through the items that we've defined, so the rules that we've defined, and then for each of them we want to then list through the rules inside of them, check it against the source that we've provided, and then add to the errors as we go. So it seems complicated, but in actual fact, if you look at it very carefully, it does make a lot of sense. So what do we actually want to loop through? Well, we want to loop through the items that we've defined. So these are basically all of the items, this, and this. These are all the items that we want to check. So for each items as item rules. Now the reason that we're doing this is item is then this, so username, password again, and name, and rules will be the array that governs the rules for that particular item. Now what we want to do is also loop through them set of rules. So we want to say for each, so we have a nested for each. We want to say for each rules as rule value. So to make this a little bit easier to grasp, let's go ahead and just echo out some data. So let's go ahead and say item has, or item let's just take a look at this. So item, yeah, so we can say item rule must be rule value. And what this is going to do is it's going to make it a little bit easier for us to list through and see how this is working. Of course, if it looks a little confusing. So when we register, validate.php. So that looks like, okay, so we've called this validation.php. So let's just change that to validate.php. Remember, because of our autoloader, it's going to load in the absolute name of this. So when we refresh, we see username required must be 1, username min must be, this basically just means true, so take that as true. Username min must be 2, username max must be 20, blah blah blah. So we've listed all our rules. We now know that we have access to each of the rules based on each field inside of here. So let's go ahead and grab the value of each of these items. So the value is going to be the source, so get or post, and that's going to be item. So now what we have is the value of each one that we've passed in. So let's just say we let's just say we have in here Alex, password, and name. Alex, we need to change this label, I've just realized. We get all of the values listed out here for each loop. So that's exactly what we want. Let's just quickly amend this. I didn't notice this before. So your name. Perfect. Okay, so now that we've got the value, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is check if it's required or not. If the value's missing, there's no point going to actually validate anything else. If we don't enter a username, there's no point checking whether it exists in the database or not. There's no point checking the minimum or maximum values. So the first thing to do is to check whether it actually exists. So if rule is equal to required, so if we're defining that something has to be required and it's empty, then we've got a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another method called add error. In fact, this will be a private method, and this is just going to add an error to the errors array. So let's say this errors equals error, and the error will be passed into this like that. So if rule is required and the value is empty, then we want to go ahead and say this add error. Item is required, so we can just say with double quotes, I guess, item is required. Now the only problem with this validated class, and it's something you might want to go ahead and adjust, is that item is now going to equal the field name of that value. So you might want to add perhaps the ability to define in your validator class up here the name that should be displayed. So perhaps you could say something like name equals username, and then we could pull that name from it. But for now, we're just going to use the field name. It's just something to think about, and that probably enhance learning of working with things like this. So otherwise, what do we want to do? Well, let's go ahead and just test this error functionality first. So what we want to do is we want to create another method, and this is going to be a public one called errors, which is going to return the list of errors that we have. Fairly straightforward. We just want to say return this errors, and that's it. So inside of our code here, if we pass, we can just say passed. Otherwise, we want to output errors. Now, you're probably thinking, well, we don't have a way to find if this is passed or not. So public function passed, and we want to return, you probably guessed it, this passed, which up here is false. Now this is always going to be false because we're not actually doing anything in here to say otherwise. So what we want to do is we want to have a quick check when we're done looping through and validating everything, and we want to check if our errors array is empty or not. Or we could say this errors. So if our errors array is empty as returned by our errors function, we want to say this past is true because we haven't stored any errors, and then we want to go ahead and return this so we can chain on things like past. So let's go ahead and check this now. Otherwise we'll print our validation errors. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this. Let's hit register. Can't use method return value in right context. Let's just check what's happened there. Line 26. So line 26 here, if empty this errors. Of course. Okay, so we're just going to use the property instead, because what we're doing here is we're returning something and then using it inside of empty, which we're not allowed to do. So we'll just check the actual array that we store up here, which is, I guess that makes sense. So let's just refresh the page and we'll click register. You can see here that we're now returned with an array of errors, which is essentially what we've set out to do, and we've got username is required, password is required, password again is required, and name is required. If I enter a username and click register, we only get 3 errors. Perfect. Now the only problem here is that we aren't being returned with the past data that we've used. So if I was to enter a username and my name, but I forgot somehow to enter a password, we get our errors back, but these two are missing. So let's just go ahead and just fill that in now. It just save a little bit of time. So inside of value here, what we can do is we can just basically, because we're always going to be outputting an empty string if this data doesn't exist, we can just open some PHP tags and echo out input get username. Okay, so we can do this, and we can do exactly the same thing for the name as well. Now there's one thing left to do here, and if you're security savvy, you would have known what we need to do is call out escape function, just to sanitize that data so it doesn't interfere with our form. And when we refresh, there we go. So our data is back again. So we can now go, oh yeah, sorry, the password's required. I'll go ahead and enter an account password. And obviously we're going to be looping through this and outputting it in a much nicer way. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is. So if it passes, we just echo out passed. And I guess we didn't test that. So let's just enter password and password, click register, and it says passed. Perfect. So what we now need to do is actually fill in the ability to actually define the rules that we've created. So we've created some rules here, or defined the rules that we want. Required we know works, but we now want to focus on the things like min, max, and stuff like that. So what we want to do is inside validate, we want to switch the rules. So we want to use a switch statement, and we want to switch the rule that we want. And I guess here we would just want to say if not empty value. So we want to switch the rule, and we want a case for each of the rules that we've already defined. So the first one is min. Well, we'll just say the first one is min. It doesn't really matter what order we put them in. Then we'll say max, matches, and unique. So min, max, matches, and unique. It doesn't need to be done this way as a switch, but it just makes it a little bit more modular, and it just looks a bit easier on the eye, and it's easier to keep track of. So for the minimum value, what do we want to do? Well, we want to check that the string length of the value is less than the rule value that we've defined. So the string value, the string length of the value of the this value is less than the rule value that's defined. So a little if statement, if string length of value, and we should probably go ahead and trim this just so we don't end up with any white space. So if the string length of the value is less than rule value, what do we want to do? Well, we want to add an error. So we want to say this add error, as we did with the required field, and we want to say, let's put this as double quotes, we want to say item must be a minimum of rule value characters. There we are. So that's our error. Let's go ahead and test these out as we go, just so we know where we're at. So I'm going to say username is A, register. Username must be a minimum of 2 characters. Alex, register, and that error goes. So we know that that works now. And that will obviously be the same for each field because we're looping through each field. So for the maximum one, it's pretty much the same. So we can just copy and paste this just to save a little bit of time. Instead, it's going to be the opposite way round. For the operand, we're going to say greater than instead. And in this time, we're going to say a maximum of rule value characters. And in this case, remember the username is a maximum of 20. So if I was to just type Alex and just copy and paste this a few times, register, username must be a maximum of 20 characters. So we can go ahead and amend that to Alex, hit register, and that error goes as well. So we've now done the min and max. Let's go ahead and do the matches. So this is for the passwords. It doesn't have to be for passwords. We might just be checking a capture value or anything really, but we want to check if the value is not equal to the source rule value. So if value, as we've already checked here, we use string length. In this case, we don't need to use string length. If the value is not equal to the source, so remember the post or anything like that, rule value. Now, why are we using source when we've already looping through the items? Well, we're checking another value. So for each loop, we're not going to have that value available to us in this loop. So we need to refer back to post or get, whatever it is, check the rule value, and then see whether that's available or not, because the rule value refers to another field's value, basically, of another field's identifier. So if that doesn't equal, that means that something must match. So we say this, add error. And in here again, in double quotes, we want to say rule value must match item. So let's go and check this out. Let's hit register. All of the fields are required. Let's fill in our name sensibly. And we'll say password in here, but I'll go ahead and type in password 1 in here and click register. Password must match password again. So that works. So now is the slightly more tricky unique value, which isn't really that difficult because all we're actually doing is using the database wrapper that we've already created, and we're going to use the get method on that. So if we cast our mind back to when we created the database wrapper, we're going to create a check by using this DB. Remember up here, we got the instance of the database that we're working with, the database connection we're working with, and stored it inside DB. So this DB, we don't really have to do this, but I guess it's entirely up to you. Get, so we want to get something, and we want to get from the a particular table, basically. So we want to make sure it's unique to users. So we want to say get, and that will be the rule value. So we want to say rule value. And in here we have an array. So remember here, just for an example, we'd say username equals Alex. But of course we don't want to say this because that would mean that we only are checking these values. Instead, we want to replace them with the item that we're checking and the value that we've been defined with the actual data that's been entered by the user. Then what we want to do is we want to say if check, and we use our database method count to find out how many results have been returned. If there is a count, a positive count, that means that this value does exist in the database and therefore that item already exists. So we want to just say something like this, add error. And again, sorry, double quotes, item already exists. And that's it. So obviously with item, we're outputting the rule value in the item each time. So what we might want to do is for each of the items, we might want to say item equals escape. item, just so we are outputting, sanitizing that. So I'm going to click register. They're all required. Let's go ahead and type in Alex, password, and Alex Garrett. So these all are valid. When I hit register though, let's just check what's gone on here. So this DB. Okay, let's just have a look here. So let's see. So we're constructing. That's why construct. Lovely. Okay, so a little bit of a spelling mistake there meant that our database handler wasn't available to us. Let's go ahead and just enter this data again. So password, and my full name. Register, username already exists. If I was to type in something like Billy and enter a password, and the password is correct, when I register, we get. We've already got Billy in there, haven't we? Let's check. So we've got Billy Dale. Let's just type in Ashley. Password and password. Click register. Passed. So all of our rules have now passed. Now these are all the rules we need, but you might need different rules for your application. So it really depends entirely on your use. So let's wrap things up quickly. And all of our validator class is done now, but all we want to do is output our errors in a certain way if we don't pass. So basically all we're going to do is we're going to say for each validation errors as error, and then all we're going to do is just echo error and then a line break. So you can do this in whatever way you want, so the markup does come out a little bit nicer, but for now we're just going to do this because we're learning about this system and we're learning about object-oriented programming. We're not too interested in MVC or correct markup or anything like that. So there's our validation class. We can validate anything we like now by using this validation class, defining rules, checking if the validation's passed, and we can do something based on that. So that is basically our validation class, and we can use that now wherever we want in our application. We don't need to talk about it. We know the syntax, and it's going to save us a lot of time.